By the way, did you see this story over the weekend? A painting by the acclaimed Dutch artist Piet Mondrian has been hanging upside down for 77 years and nobody noticed. This is the painting. Yeah, everyone's standing around admiring it, and they failed to spot that it's upside down. Here it is the right way up, and here it is the wrong way up. Oh, whoops, no, sorry, my mistake. Here it is the right way up. And here is the way it has been wrongly displayed for 3/4 of a century. I may not know much about art, but I know which way up I like it, and you used to be able to tell, at least with Meneer Mondrian's predecessors as great Dutch painters. For example, if you walked into a gallery and saw Van Gogh's self-portrait after he cut off his ear, you'd think, wow, you've got to be really good to paint a self-portrait while you're standing on your head, especially after you just cut off your ear. Or how about Bruegel the Elder and the blind leading the blind upside down? Heavy. So it's like a metaphor for maybe the latest G7 summit. Clever, but perhaps a bit too high concept. But with this Mondrian thing, what's the diff? This is the right way, and this is the wrong way. Right? Wrong. What's the difference? Okay, you knew it was coming. You knew I wouldn't be able to resist. It's way too obvious symbolic power, so let's get on with it. Don't you find our politics is a bit like that? Here's Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, New Labour. Oh, and here's Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss, whoever, newish, Labourish Tories. What's the diff? It's a distinction without a difference. The one great exception to the indistinguishability of our two governing parties for a quarter century now was Brexit, and that was imposed on the Tories only because David Cameron got head-faked into a referendum. In a functioning democracy, it should be extremely weird to have a fundamental issue on which the people are deeply divided, and yet every single party in Parliament takes only one side of that issue. Mr Cameron's ministry, the Labour opposition, the Lib Dems, SNP, Plaid Cymru, even Sinn Bloody Féin, under whom Irish nationalism has so degraded that they wanted to leave one impotent province of Brussels to join another impotent province of Brussels. One reason Britain voted to leave the EU was because of the so-called democratic deficit. Where do you go to vote out Cruella von der Leyen or the new Euro-Commissar of the week, Thierry Breton, of whom more later? But the democratic deficit applies to the Palace of Westminster too. 6 years after the vote, most members of the Commons and the overwhelming majority of the Lords still do not accept the people's verdict. In fact, the democratic defamation embodied in Parliament's wall-to-wall Europhilia has now been extended to every other public policy. Here's the Conservative position on net zero, and here's the Labour position on net zero. Great. Here's the Conservative position on lockdown, and here's the Labour position on lockdown. Here's the Conservative position on free speech, gender identity, the Ukraine war, immigration, and here's the Labour position on free speech, gender identity, the Ukraine war, immigration. As Brexit should have taught us, it's not good for politics to take place only between parties that are in lockstep agreement on everything that matters. It's telling the citizenry that democratic politics is mere theatre. It's like getting a vote on who plays the fourth stiff from the right in some crappy amateur dramatics repertory production of a third-rate drawing room comedy. The cast changes, the plot and the leaden dialogue remain the same. Here is the most urgent example of this democratic deficit, the ever-widening gulf between the rulers and the ruled. It's the migrant tide on the southern shore every night, 1,000 a night. As we heard last week, somewhere between 1 and 2% of all Albanian males are estimated to have moved to the United Kingdom. As you can see, in almost any of the RNLI lifeboats shepherding them from French waters to the express check-in, there are no women, no children, just young military-age men, like that fella leaping off and setting his first foot on British soil. For the purposes of comparison, it's actually a larger invasion force than that dispatched by Tony Blair in 2003 to subdue the southern third of Iraq. It's well organised by multinational criminal gangs who have somehow co-opted the laughably misnamed UK border force, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, and yes, the Home Office, and basically turn them into their business partners. There are deranged suicidal men lobbing petrol bombs at migrant centres. A guy like that can make the headlines. But there are also fellas who don't make the headlines, law-abiding but fearful citizens who now choose to sleep very fitfully with sledgehammers under their beds and with floodlights installed in their front gardens. You don't hear so much about them, but they're in the news. But these are asylum seekers. Nothing can be done. If that's really so, the quickest way for Vladimir Putin to take Ukraine would have been to send 100,000 Russian quote-unquote asylum seekers over the border. They'd be living in the Kyiv Sofitel and sucking up the entirety of the Ukrainian budget by now. Oh, and speaking of money, are you shivering in the dark? Waiting 2 business days for an ambulance just as the bank repossess your car? Here's some news so heartwarming you don't need central heating. This'll warm your cockles all by itself. You, yes you, the British taxpayer, Mrs. Gladys Scoggins of 27A Acacia Gardens, you will be giving millions of pounds to Albania to, quote, spruce up Albania, so none of the strapping young Albanian lads will want to leave. Have our nitwit political class ever been to Albania? Its unique selling point is how delightfully unspruced up it is. The communists couldn't spruce it up, King Zog couldn't spruce it up, the Ottoman Empire couldn't spruce it up, but Rishi Sunak apparently bestrides the Balkans like a colossus. Do you want to put a price tag on the sprucing up of Albania, Prime Minister? Let me know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk.